Across the galaxy, the rumors of a new and terrifying weapon spread like wildfire. It began in the back alleys of spaceports, whispered between traders and smugglers who had seen it firsthand, or thought they had. But as more and more stories emerged, the tales grew darker and more elaborate. Some claimed it was a massive floating fortress that could burn entire planets to ash in an instant. Others said it could phase in and out of reality itself, making it impossible to track or defend against. The name, Titan, began to echo through the corridors of the galaxy's most powerful factions. No one knew for sure what the Titan was, but everyone agreed on one thing. It was not something they could afford to ignore. At first, the biggest powers dismissed the stories as mere superstition. Just another myth to add to the long list of space legends. The Zithor Empire, a ruthless alien faction known for their might and cunning, scoffed at the idea of an unstoppable weapon appearing out of nowhere. Their fleet was vast, their weapons unmatched. They were confident that they could crush any threat before it even reached their borders. But a strange thing happened when the Zithor sent out a scouting fleet to investigate the growing rumors. None of the ships ever returned. The same thing happened to the Arkan Coalition, a federation of technologically advanced species. Their fleet, which had once shattered entire civilizations, was sent to track down the source of these disturbing rumors. A day later, they reported a strange anomaly, a faint energy signature that flickered briefly before vanishing. Then, they too vanished, without a trace. Not even the best tracking systems in the galaxy could pinpoint what had happened. And so, the fear began to spread like a plague. On the fringe of known space, isolated colonies that had long been abandoned by the greater powers started sending out distress signals. A mining colony on the edge of the Seraph Nebula, once left to fend for itself, now screamed for help, saying that their entire sector had been obliterated in a flash of light. The few survivors reported seeing a massive dark ship that descended from the void, vaporizing everything in its path without so much as a warning. But what terrified them most was that the ship didn't seem to have a crew. It moved as if it were alive, as if it had a mind of its own. Now, no faction, no government, and no star system was safe. All eyes turned to the galaxy's intelligence agencies. Governments pooled their resources, sending fleets and spies to gather information, but there were no concrete answers. A small fleet of scouts sent to track the Titan vanished, and once again, the only message they left behind was a single cryptic transmission. It's not an enemy. It's a legend reborn. The rumors, once whispered in the shadows, were now undeniable. The Titan had appeared, and with it, the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift forever. There was no turning back now. The sheer magnitude of the Titan's power shook the foundations of the galaxy. The major factions, once confident in their technological superiority and military might, were now scrambling. They had thought themselves untouchable, but now they faced an adversary they couldn't even understand, let alone defeat. Governments that had once stood tall and proud began to falter under the weight of fear. The Zithor Empire, once a dominating force, began retreating behind heavily fortified borders. Their fleets, which had struck fear across entire sectors, were now pulled back for defensive measures. Their leaders met in secret, knowing that their military prowess might be useless against the Titan. Even their most advanced warships, the crown jewels of their fleet, had been wiped out in a single encounter with the mysterious ship. There were no strategies, no contingencies, only the unsettling thought that there was nothing they could do. The Arkan Coalition, with its vast network of allies and advanced technology, convened an emergency summit. Leaders from dozens of species gathered, their faces filled with confusion and dread. They had once prided themselves on diplomacy and peace, but the appearance of the Titan had shattered that illusion. Even their most advanced surveillance satellites couldn't track the warship, and their long-range scanners had been scrambled the moment they tried to get close. It was as if the Titan was always one step ahead, always watching. Meanwhile, the smaller and less powerful systems, those that had long been forgotten by the great powers, were hit hardest. Planets and stations that relied on trade and security were left vulnerable. Some tried to negotiate, sending emissaries to plead for mercy, but those who attempted diplomacy were met with silence. The Titan did not respond to pleas or threats. It simply existed, an immovable force with no apparent purpose other than to cause fear and destruction. A small independent colony on the outskirts of the Farron cluster sent out a desperate broadcast, their message filled with raw panic. "The Titan is here." It has. The transmission cut off abruptly. In its place was a faint, echoing hum, a low-frequency signal that no one could trace or decode. That was the last anyone heard from that colony. No one dared venture out there to find out what had happened. The media, both independent and state-controlled, began to fuel the fear. Propaganda networks seized on the rumors, painting the Titan as a harbinger of doom, a force sent to annihilate entire civilizations. News outlets from all over the galaxy picked up the story, broadcasting vivid depictions of the Titan's devastation, an ever-growing legend. The more they spoke of it, the more the fear spread, leaving no corner of the galaxy untouched. In the heart of the galaxy, leaders began calling for unity. Desperate to rally forces against the unknown enemy, they sought out alliances that had once seemed impossible. The more power they brought together, the more they realized how outmatched they were. The Titan, a ship that defied every understanding of physics and war, was an unstoppable entity. And yet there was no face, no entity to fight, just an unseen force that left only destruction in its wake. The fear was not just from the Titan itself. It was from the knowledge that no one understood it. No one could predict what it would do next. The entire galaxy was gripped by the realization that something had awakened, something far beyond their control. The old ways of diplomacy, of war, of power, all seemed meaningless in the face of this new, incomprehensible threat. As the galaxy descended deeper into chaos, the mysterious force behind the Titan began to take shape, its true identity finally revealed. Despite the fear and confusion, the truth was more shocking than anyone had anticipated. The Titan was not some unknown alien superweapon. It was humanity's legacy. A small group of explorers, human descendants who had long been hidden in the farthest corners of the galaxy, emerged from the void. They had lived in secret, avoiding the spotlight and the powerful galactic factions for centuries. But now, with the awakening of the Titan, they had returned, and their mission was clear: to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The human presence was met with disbelief. Humanity was thought to be lost, wiped out long ago, when their ancient empire fell under mysterious circumstances. The records were fragmented, their history erased, but the one thing that had remained was the Titan, the greatest warship ever created, left dormant for centuries in a forgotten corner of space. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. As the surviving human ships emerged from deep space, it became evident that the Titan had been designed not as a weapon of conquest, but as a shield. Its purpose was not just to dominate, but to protect, to defend humanity's place in the galaxy when the time was right. But that time had come. And now, humanity was back, bringing with them the most powerful weapon ever constructed. The galaxy had forgotten the brilliance of human engineering, the tenacity of their will, and the might of their warship. But the Titan, built by their ancestors, was far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in centuries, a human fleet emerged from the shadows. The humans were not the invaders they had been painted as, but survivors of a lost empire, now returned to fulfill a forgotten promise. The first human leader to address the galaxy was a woman named Ilara Solis, a descendant of the original human empire. She stood before a massive hologram projector, her message broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "We are the heirs of a once great civilization." Ilara's voice echoed through space. "We did not come to conquer. We came to reclaim our legacy, to bring balance to this galaxy that we once called home." The Titan was built to protect us all, to ensure the peace our ancestors envisioned. But we will not allow it to fall into the hands of those who seek to use it for destruction. We are the keepers of the Titan, and we are not afraid." Her words sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The idea that humanity, once seen as a mere myth, the stuff of ancient legends, was not only real but also returning as the rightful rulers of the stars, was more than many could comprehend. The human fleet was modest in size, but it was clear that the Titan was their trump card. No one could challenge the sheer destructive force it wielded. The Titan, once dormant, now hummed with energy, its systems reactivating in sync with humanity's return. Its enormous engines pulsed with a deep, resonant thrum that sent ripples through the fabric of space itself. It was no longer a ghost, no longer a relic of the past. It was alive, and with it, humanity's presence in the galaxy had been restored. Yet, despite their return, many still couldn't believe it. How could one species be so powerful? How could humanity, whose empire had crumbled so long ago, have survived and built such an extraordinary weapon? The answer was simple. Humanity had never truly gone away. They had been watching, waiting, preparing for the day when they would return. And now, with the Titan at their command, they were ready to show the galaxy just what humans were capable of. Humanity's return had already shaken the galaxy, but nothing compared to the spectacle of the Titan's full display of power. The first true demonstration occurred in the outer systems of the Varan Expanse, where a small but highly advanced fleet of mercenaries had taken control of a mining colony. The colony's resources were valuable to a number of galactic factions, and the mercenaries had been using their newfound power to hold the systems hostage. They thought themselves untouchable, immune to any reprisal. That was until the Titan appeared. The fleet of mercenaries was well equipped, their ships reinforced with cutting-edge technology, and armed with energy weapons capable of decimating entire stations. They were confident they could repel any attack, but they had no idea what they were up against. From the moment the Titan dropped out of hyperspace, everything changed. The colossal warship appeared in a flash of dazzling light, its hull shimmering like a shadow made of the void itself. The Titan's presence was enough to stop the mercenary fleet dead in its tracks. A transmission came from their flagship, demanding an explanation, a plea for mercy. The message fell on deaf ears. Without warning, the Titan unleashed a barrage of energy pulses. The first hit disintegrated a small frigate with a single shot, turning the vessel to nothing more than a cloud of debris. The shockwave from the blast rocked the entire system, shattering the calm that had once reigned there. The mercenaries scrambled to retaliate, but their weapons barely scratched the Titan's shields. As the battle raged on, it became evident that the mercenaries were outclassed in every conceivable way. The Titan was far more than just a weapon. It was a force of nature. Its main weapons fired with pinpoint precision, vaporizing entire ships in an instant. For every enemy ship that attempted to flee, the Titan was there, blocking their escape, its enormous mass cutting off all routes of retreat. The mercenary flagship attempted to engage the Titan directly, launching a full broadside of torpedoes. But the Titan's shields absorbed the energy with ease, leaving the mercenary fleet's most powerful weapons completely ineffective. The Titan's response was swift. A single pulse from its main cannon obliterated the flagship's entire hull. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the battlefield, sending the surviving ships into a disorganized retreat. As the final mercenary ships were picked off one by one, the Titan's presence was undeniable. No other force in the galaxy could stand against it. The survivors of the mercenary fleet would tell tales of their defeat for years to come. Stories of a warship that moved like a shadow, that destroyed without mercy, and that no weapon could harm. By the time the battle ended, the Varan Expanse was eerily quiet. The Titan had left, having completed its mission of cleansing the system. No one dared to follow. The legend of the Titan had grown, but now it was no longer just a legend. It was a reality, a terrifying, invincible force that could not be stopped. News of the Titan's victory spread like wildfire. Reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy, each one confirming the unimaginable. The humans had returned, and they were not to be underestimated. The Titan was not just a weapon, it was a harbinger, a warning to anyone who dared stand in humanity's way. As the dust settled, the message was clear. The galaxy would have to adapt to the new order. The Titan's power was absolute, and humanity, now armed with the most advanced warship in existence, would not be ignored. The sudden and overwhelming might of the Titan caused ripples throughout the galaxy that no one could ignore. Factions, who had once fought bitterly among themselves, began to understand a harsh reality. They were no longer the apex powers. The Titan had become the center of a galaxy-wide crisis, and as such, old enmities were now secondary. The galaxy's most powerful factions realized that to survive, they had to unite, at least temporarily, against this new and terrifying force. The Zithor Empire, once the pinnacle of military might, was the first to shift their stance. Their fleets had been reduced to rubble by the Titan's unrelenting assault, and their once proud warships had been scattered across the stars. Seeing their own ships fall to the Titan's energy pulses, the Zithor leaders knew their empire was in jeopardy. Their war machines, unrivaled in any previous conflict, now seemed obsolete. Their arrogance had led them to dismiss the existence of the Titan, but now they realized the scale of their mistake. The Arkan coalition, too, faced a grim future. While they had maintained diplomatic relations with other factions for centuries, their technological superiority had been rendered meaningless in the face of the Titan. They could no longer afford to operate as they once had, relying on alliances with smaller species to maintain power. The time had come for a different strategy. The threat of the Titan had pushed them to seek out old enemies and forge a new path, one of unity. Thus, the greatest alliance in the history of the galaxy was born. A coalition of the galaxy's most powerful and rival factions. The Zithor, the Arkan coalition, the mercantile Xenar Dominion, and the military pragmatic Volar Dominion. These factions, once bitter enemies, now found themselves sitting across from one another, speaking the language of survival. But there was more at play. The return of humanity had not just altered the balance of power, it had ignited fear. The ancient fear of humanity that had once driven them to the fringes of space, the suspicion of their potential, and the myth of their long-lost empire had reemerged. Their return wasn't just a political challenge, it was an existential one. The galaxy had to ask itself, if humanity had such power to create the Titan, what else could they create? And more terrifying still, what would happen if humanity decided they wanted more? For weeks, the Alliance representatives met in secret. They devised plans, studied old human records, and debated the best course of action. Could they overwhelm the Titan with a united fleet? Would their combined technologies give them an edge? Or was the Titan simply too much for even their combined forces to handle? While they schemed, the threat of the Dread loomed in the background, an ancient alien race that had once nearly wiped out the galaxy. The last time they were seen, humanity's ancestors had fought and defeated them with the aid of the Titan. But now, rumors spread that the Dread were returning, and this time, they might be even more powerful. The Alliance was faced with a difficult decision. Could they continue to fight each other, or was it time to put aside their differences and prepare for an even greater, more unimaginable threat? The answer came unexpectedly. A diplomatic envoy from humanity's reborn empire, led by Ilara Solis, offered a message of cooperation. We seek no war with you. We have no desire to conquer. But the Titan was built for protection, not for destruction. There is a greater enemy on the horizon, one we cannot defeat alone. For the first time in decades, the leaders of the rival factions hesitated. The Titan, a symbol of fear and power, was also offering a hand of unity, and with the shadow of the Dread approaching, it was clear that the old way of doing things might no longer be enough. The fragile alliance, still in its infancy, was tested much sooner than anyone expected. News of the Dread's resurgence spread like wildfire across the galaxy, a chilling reminder of the ancient horrors that once ravaged entire star systems. It was impossible to ignore now. The Dread were real. They were back. For centuries, the galaxy had lived in relative peace, with only the occasional skirmish between factions breaking the silence of the stars. But the return of the Dread, an ancient alien species once thought to be extinguished by the early human empire, with the help of the Titan, was a nightmare made flesh. It was said that the Dread were relentless, an unstoppable wave of destruction, capable of erasing entire civilizations without leaving a trace. Their motives remained as unclear as their origins, but one thing was certain: they left nothing but devastation in their wake. The Titan, humanity's ancient weapon, was their only hope. But as the newly formed alliance began to mobilize, it became painfully clear that the Dread were not just a threat. They were a calculated, terrifying enemy. Their ships, designed to adapt to any defense, were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Each vessel was a living organism, capable of regenerating and evolving in real time. The Dread's primary advantage was their ability to communicate and coordinate across vast distances, making them nearly impossible to outmaneuver. As the Alliance forces prepared for war, reports came in from across the galaxy, confirming that the Dread were targeting key worlds in every sector. The first major assault took place in the Galvaris sector, a prosperous hub of trade and commerce that had once been a symbol of the galaxy's peace. In a single, coordinated strike, the Dread arrived without warning, their ships descending from the void like predators hunting prey. They unleashed a wave of devastating energy pulses that tore through the planet's defenses, leaving entire cities in ruins. Within hours, the planet's surface was a charred wasteland. The Dread didn't bother to enslave or subjugate the population. They simply wiped it out, erasing the planet from existence. No distress signals had been sent. No warning. The only trace left behind was the afterimage of destruction, a blackened husk of a once thriving world. The Alliance was on high alert. The Dread had chosen their first target wisely, a vital trade world that supported the supply lines of the Arkan Coalition, the Zithar Empire, and the Xenar Dominion. In one swift move, they had disrupted the entire galactic economy and demonstrated their terrifying capacity for precision strikes. Ilara Solis, now in command of the human forces, addressed the leaders of the Alliance. The weight of the situation was heavy in the room. "We've lost Galvaris, but this is just the beginning. If we don't act quickly, more worlds will fall. The Dread are methodical, they're relentless, and they will not stop. We have the Titan, but it's only one weapon. We must unite our fleets and strike together, before it's too late." The room was silent, the gravity of Ilara's words sinking in. For the first time since their fragile alliance had formed, there was a unified resolve among the factions. The threat of the Dread had forced even the most distrustful leaders to put aside their differences. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Plans were drawn up for a counteroffensive. The Titan would lead the charge, but the combined fleets of the Zithor, Arkan, Xenar, and Volar would support it. The Alliance wasn't just a political union anymore. It was a war machine, and its first test would be the Dread. But even with the Titan at the forefront, there were doubts. The Dread's ships were unlike any they had faced before, and no one knew exactly how to defeat an enemy that seemed to adapt with every battle. As the fleets mobilized and war preparations began in earnest, one truth stood clear. The galaxy was no longer divided by politics or pride. It was united by survival. The Dread had come to take everything, and the only question now was whether the Alliance would be strong enough to stop them. Time was running out. The galaxy had never faced a threat like the Dread, and as the Alliance's fleets gathered in the shadow of their united forces, the weight of their situation became undeniably clear. The Titan was humanity's greatest weapon, but it was only one ship, and the Dread had already shown how easily they could tear apart entire worlds. To defeat them, the galaxy's greatest minds had to come together, and devise a strategy that could match their cunning. The Alliance had no illusions. Their combined fleets were formidable, but they were not invincible. The Dread adapted too quickly, their ships evolving in the midst of battle. Their tactics were brutal and efficient, leaving no room for error. As the fleets assembled in the deep space of the Orcs cluster, the sense of urgency was palpable. Every member of the Alliance knew that this could be their last stand. Ilara Solis, standing at the helm of the Titan, felt the immense pressure that came with leading not just humanity's forces, but a galaxy-wide coalition that had only recently set aside centuries of animosity. She had the Titan, but she knew that brute force alone would not win this war. The Dread had no honor, no need for diplomacy. They only understood one thing: destruction. And they would not stop until the galaxy was nothing but ashes. "We fight for survival," Ilara spoke to the leaders of the other factions, her voice calm but firm. "We fight for every world we've lost and every world still standing. This is not just a war for power. It is a war for the future of every living being in this galaxy. The Dread must be stopped now, or they will consume everything." The battle plan was set. The Titan, with its unmatched firepower, would lead the assault, drawing the Dread's attention and drawing them into a trap. Behind it, the combined fleets of the Zithor, Arkan, Zener, and Volar would strike from multiple angles, coordinated in a way that would overwhelm the Dread's adaptability. The hope was that they could force the Dread into a confrontation where they couldn't simply evolve in response to every attack. The first skirmishes were brutal. The Dread ships moved with terrifying precision, absorbing fire and adapting to every countermeasure the Alliance threw at them. The Titan's weapons cut through Dread vessels like a scythe through wheat, but every time they destroyed one ship, two more seemed to take its place. It was clear that the Dread had no limits, no weaknesses that could be exploited. In the chaos of battle, it became evident that the Alliance's strategy was working, at least partially. The Dread were starting to slow, their adaptability taxed by the sheer scale of the combined assault. But then something unexpected happened. A massive flagship, larger than any Dread ship seen before, appeared from the darkness. It was a grotesque and terrifying vessel, its design more organic than mechanical, pulsating with dark energy. This was no ordinary ship. It was their command vessel, the heart of the Dread fleet. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The Alliance had been fighting against the Dread soldiers, but now they were face to face with the true power of the Dread, a creature of unimaginable power, connected to every ship and every attack, a mind that controlled the fate of the entire fleet. The Titan, though powerful, would need every bit of its might to stand a chance against this behemoth. Ilara knew that this was the moment that would define the fate of the galaxy. With a resolute breath, she gave the order: "Prepare for the final assault. All forces, focus on the flagship. This ends now." With that, the battle escalated into a fever pitch. The Alliance's ships, battered but unbroken, closed in on the Dread flagship. Their final assault would decide everything. The final stand was underway, and every ship, every soldier, every leader understood that the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. The battle raged on, a symphony of chaos and destruction that echoed across the stars. The Alliance's fleets, battered and bruised but not broken, poured every ounce of firepower they had into the Dread's flagship. The Titan, leading the charge, was a beacon of destruction, its weapons tearing into the Dread's defenses with unrelenting fury. But the Dread flagship, with its pulsating organic core and dark energy fields, absorbed every blow, adapting and evolving with terrifying speed. The Dread were not simply responding. They were learning. It became clear that the Alliance could not simply rely on brute force. The Titan, despite its massive firepower, was struggling to break through the flagship's adaptive shields. For the first time, the Alliance was on the verge of defeat. But then, a voice broke through the chaos. It was Ilara Solis, calm and composed as ever, her eyes locked on the data screens flashing in front of her. "We need to hit their core," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. "The flagship's energy source is not just its shield. It's its heart. If we disrupt it, we can stop their entire fleet from adapting." The revelation came too late for some. Several ships in the Alliance's fleet were already retreating, having sustained crippling damage. The Zithor, though fierce, were beginning to falter. But the Arkan and Volar fleets were still strong, and they had one advantage: unity. Despite old rivalries, the Alliance had come together with a singular goal. They would not lose. With renewed determination, the Titan's captain, an officer named Commander Thorn, adjusted their course. "Target the core, all ships. Focus everything we have on that point. This is it." The Alliance's forces, working as one, unleashed everything they had left. The Titan fired its main cannon, the energy blast more concentrated than ever before. The Xenar Dominion's fleet moved in, providing cover, while the Arkan's advanced fighters darted in and out of the flagship's defenses, creating openings for the final strike. The Dread flagship's shields flickered, then crackled under the assault, unable to adapt fast enough to the coordinated onslaught. The moment the Titan's cannon hit the heart of the Dread flagship, a massive shockwave rippled through the battlefield. The flagship's core imploded in a brilliant burst of light, sending shockwaves across the entire fleet. The Dread ships, once formidable and unified, faltered. The organic, interconnected structure that had once powered them was gone, and without it, they were nothing. For a moment, everything was silent. The surviving Dread ships, now leaderless and disoriented, were easy prey for the remaining Alliance fleets. The battle was over. The Dread had been defeated. As the last of the Dread vessels were picked off, the surviving ships of the Alliance gathered around the wreckage of the flagship. The scale of the victory began to settle in. The galaxy was saved, but at what cost? Ilara Solis stood on the bridge of the Titan, looking out at the vast emptiness of space. The battle was won, but she knew this was not the end. The galaxy had been forever changed. The Dread, though defeated, had left a lasting scar on the cosmos. And now, the Alliance, humanity, the Zithor, the Arkan, the Xenar, and the Volar, was no longer a coalition of convenience. It had become a new foundation for peace and progress. "We've won," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. "But this is just the beginning of a new era." Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Dread were no more. The Alliance had stood strong, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy found itself united not by fear, but by hope. The Titan's legend would live on, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when the galaxy came together. The future was uncertain, but humanity and its allies now had a chance to rebuild, to heal the wounds of the past, and to forge a new destiny, one where peace could once again reign among the stars.